There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind.
It was basically a cube with inside of a sphere where the points of the cube were touching outside of the sphere.
Roger. There's troubleshooting machines out here.
So this isn't anything that just is limited to the United States. It's a worldwide phenomenon.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO podcast. This is part 1.5 of our profile series on Tom DeLonge. Dan, welcome back.
Hello, it's good to be back. I realized in our last recording, which has gone out, we actually said kind of bon voyage, and that was it. But I'm back today recording with you for this.
But when this goes out, you'll be away.
Yeah, I will be away.
You said bye to the listeners, I suppose, last time.
Yeah, I guess so. That's true. That's true.
This will go out when you're in Colombia. So yeah, this will be like the middle of that week. You'll have been there a couple of days. So I hope you're having a nice time and all that, and no one's destroyed your new MacBook yet. But listen, we said we were going to do a part 1.5 because part 1 was focusing on Tom's background and the build-up to his journey before To the Stars Academy, before we really knew about TTSA and what it was going to be about. Part 2 is going to be us looking at the build-up to what Team A was meant to be, what Team B ended up being that launched the TTSA brand, and we're going to look at the initial stage and the build and the characters behind TTSA, and it'll probably go into a part 3 before we even get to discuss Unidentified in the series and what came of To the Stars Academy. So we're not rushing this, folks. We've got plenty of time, and there's a lot to digest as we go into it as well. Even as I start picking what I thought was going to be a very short section, I start making lots of notes. And what I love, part 2, we've got a comment from Lou Elizondo that he's sent us over on the New York Times article that famously launched, and a part of that when I was reading it, I was like, but I won't go into that just yet. So lots to look forward to, and that'll be out in a week or so as well. So the dates and times really mean nothing right now because I'm talking about these before shows that are already in the can haven't even been released yet. But if you're on the Patreon, the Apple Premium, the Spotify Premium, or on YouTube as a member, you're going to get access to all this stuff early as well. So thank you for supporting. If not, thank you for listening on the free feeds. Listen to the adverts. It's always helpful. I want to start off by correcting Tom DeLonge is not from Poway, California, San Diego. He's from Poway. Yeah. That was right. Sam who told me I butchered the pronunciation in a very nice way. He done that, and he was right because I did. So it's not Poway, San Diego, it's Poway, San Diego, and I await someone else getting back to me to tell me actually it's Poway. And I'm going to be like, he's from San Diego. That's good enough.
Sopo. That's the sound.
Yeah, Sopo. There you go. So yeah, that's for Sam. And listen, let's get into this listeners' thoughts and opinions section on that part 1 that we done. So long-time supporter and big member of the Discord channel, which you get access to being part of Patreon and such, is Gnosis. And Gnosis said straight off the bat, something we're going to kind of cover in more detail in part 2, right at the beginning, to be honest, but we'll touch on it now. If Hillary Clinton had won the 2016 election and WikiLeaks had never leaked the Podesta, DeLonge, McCasland emails, where do you think we would be in 2022? He adds that for me, the most interesting aspect and difference is that the US Air Force have been silent since 2017, yet it was an Air Force general who was DeLonge's primary contact to start a disclosure program. What do you think continued steering by McCasland might have looked like, and would we know the name Lou Elizondo? So, Dan, back to that initial, if Hillary Clinton won the 2016 election and WikiLeaks never leaked, where would we be? It was really interesting. I was listening to an old Coast to Coast interview. It was a couple of months ago now. And Coast to Coast, as people might know, do the news sections beforehand. You know, there was a lot of political stuff going on at the time, with obviously Trump v. Clinton. And it was really interesting. I can't even remember the time frame. It was before the election. And they were very much talking about how, Clinton's going to be the next president. I think it was around the time Trump was about to be announced as the nominee for the Republican Party, but the analyst they had on was very much talking along the lines of, it's more than likely Hillary Clinton will be the next president of the United States. And as we know, that's not what happened. Whether that's the Mandela effect, different timeline, who knows where we are. But we had 4 years of President Trump, which he played his part in a way towards the end in the field of UFOs. And we'll get to that probably at some point. But yeah, Dan, Hillary Clinton, 2016, WikiLeaks, where would we be?
Yeah, you're right in saying that they kind of acted like they had that in the bag. And this conversation could go a very different way if this was about politics and Bernie Sanders and what happened there. But it's I think it's safe to say that had Hillary Clinton won the election, she would have gone on to openly be talking about UAP. This wasn't something she was compelled to talk about. She was explaining what UAP meant and trying to get that phrase or that acronym out there before any of this big movement started happening. I think McCaslin wouldn't have, supposedly cut off Tom or turned off the faucet, is the phrase he uses. And we'd probably be, I want to say further along, but I also think we'd probably have a lot more entertainment to sift through from To the Stars. And that's what can frustrate people sometimes with that company, is they don't know how to separate the fact and fiction in these books.
Do you really think so? Devil's advocate here, Dan, okay? I'm going to try and sit on the fence. It's really easy for anyone to say that Hillary, as we know, and her husband and other presidents before her, and anyone, high-ranking officials have had an interest in UFOs. And it's one thing to talk about it in the build-up, and we don't know because it's hindsight. We can't say that it didn't have a negative impact on her winning the election because, she didn't. That the only thing we can go off of is facts. And one, she talked about UFOs, and two, she didn't win the election. I'm not saying it was a big, but to put it out there, that could potentially stop other people talking about it. It's another thing though to say that just because she had an interest and would sit on chat shows and whatnot, and we can see these emails that were released through WikiLeaks that she did have that interest in the background and privately, that she would have still pursued this had she got into office. Because again, she wins the 2016 election. Sure, COVID's 4 years away, so she doesn't have that to deal with. But we don't know what else may or may not have come up within that time with a US government ran by Hillary Clinton and her party. Famously, she didn't get on very well with the Russians. What would that relationship have been like? Would that have taken priority as we sit on the brink of World War III yet again here in 2022? But is it too easy just to say, yeah, we would have been really far along because she would have done this? Is there not a good chance that she would have went in and it would have went the same way it went for Bill?
Very possibly. When I think about how far along she would be, I don't think she's put in craft on the White House floor, and I think that it would the rollout would look the same. It just might be accelerated. But looking at how Biden responded in the White House press room compared to how confidently Hillary spoke about it when she was on the late night talk show, you're right that it's a different audience and it's a different room to speak to, and a different level of gravitas based on those two rooms as well. But I think she would have been more friendly to the subject.
How does it affect? And one of the questions Gnosis asks there is, would we know the name Lou Elizondo? Now, at that time, Lou Elizondo was locked away in his office from 2012 to 2017. He would have then had that year where he would have been working in his role with that administration in charge. How do you think that may or may not have affected Lou and his role in what happened?
Well, Lou, I guess from the Semi-Van interview that happened only a few days ago, we know now that Lou was kind of found and connected way after these points. So when I kind of use the tongue-in-cheek plan B phrase, it's just a plan that came together once the first one fell apart. And that connection and the company was forged from one meeting around a table with several individuals who we'll speak about because they were at the press launch too. And yeah, it's a very different kind of plan and look to what would have come from a more established and a wider reaching organization.
You would have to think if there's a chance that we don't know the name, Luis Elizondo. Maybe he stays in his job, maybe he doesn't. A lot can change in a year. But I suppose even with him not being involved in Team A, as we're going to call it, with, DeLonge, Podesta, McCausland, Clinton, and the others that were going to be involved in those initial discussions and WikiLeaks, Lou probably would have got involved at some point, wouldn't he? Even if it was, again, in the background, because he was still the guy running, we'll just call it the UFO program, because, that's what those guys were looking at. So, he was still the guy in charge of that. So he would have had to have been part of those conversations. At least his door would have been knocked on.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, as we know Lou Elizondo now, he would have been happy to have had those conversations, given he was only a year away from resigning in his post.
Yeah. I guess when you think of it that way, one of the things that would likely be different is we would have been presented Lou by probably Hillary or her administration as the guy looking after the UFOs, instead of having this back and forth with the DOD where they've got rid of his emails and everything like that. So it probably would have been a lot better in that way.
So so interesting point, and that's what we're going to look at with the part 2. We're going to kind of kick off with what happened around WikiLeaks and why Team A and Team B, and listen, Team B was not secondary or a poor man's follow-up by any choice, but it had to happen because of what happened, and we'll discuss that as part of part 2. So thanks, great question. Yep, anything you'd add to that, Dan?
No, I think we covered it there, right? Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. Next up, Josh, John, and Scott. People again will think I'm just making up these really common names. All had very similar questions and points that they would all like to see comparisons of activity or conversations versus what was said by Tom DeLonge in the early days as to what his position is now. That's something we will save for a final episode or a summary of everything we've done. So we don't want to run across that just now, because we'll start to go into years well past what we're looking to do in part 2. So it is something we are definitely going to do. So look out for that in the kind of final part or a summary episode of the whole profile series. So thank you for that. Is there anything, Dan, if I could put you on the spot though, that springs to mind that from those early days of Tom and his comments in those interviews that maybe has changed for you massively?
Yeah, it would be the Greek god stuff for me. That's kind of dropped out of what he talks about. It's more consciousness and source and things like that. And I don't know if that's what the book War is going to revolve around. But I would guess it's that subject. I mean, it's taken ages, so I assume it's just a bit of a touchy one,
Why do you think that did drop out? Is that one of those things, as we're going to get to talking about, Tom had his wings clipped, as many people refer to it, after a couple of interviews, let alone is it one of the big ones where he came off particularly conspiratorial and a bit all over the place, and people questioned, was he on drugs, and but he wasn't. It was just, he was just so hyper and excited and just kind of spewing all this information out there. Do you think at that point, when he had his wings clipped, he chose to cut back on some of these statements because they potentially weren't true, or he just couldn't keep going at that 100 miles an hour that he was doing?
I think he had a lot of knowledge to share, and it's like feeding an animal just too fast, right? That you kind of choke on things and you can't fully explain things. And I think that was what contributed to him kind of falling over himself on Joe Rogan, instead of just slowing down and getting a lot more focused in his conversations. And yeah, the phrase "clipped his wings" was definitely thrown around, but I think it was probably a kind of, hey, Tom, focus up, let's go a bit slower and more intentional.
Rolled up newspaper straight to the nose for Tom DeLonge. That's what happened. Bad Tom. But yeah, thanks for that, gents. Look out for that in the final episode of the series, and that'll be maybe a month or so away, probably. Taryn, great name. Like to have one that's not really common. You should definitely mention how Greer and DeLonge first met and the story behind Greer giving him the disclosure tapes. We did touch on that in the initial part 1. Which was the interview we shared. We recommended people go and check out between James Iandoli. Not an interview, but James Iandoli put together a nice package presenting that story, and that was part of it as well. So please check that out in part 1. The link is in the description. But Dan, you wanted to add something we forgot to mention as part of that story?
Just that to emphasize that Tom was one of the very first, if not the first person that Greer trusted with all those testimony tapes, and he speaks about in various clips how nervous he was even having them in his house, thinking that people were going to show up and kick his door down. So yeah, I just thought I would add that in because it speaks to the relationship between Tom and Greer at one point.
Yeah, and that is important, and I suppose that maybe, and we'll get to one of Dave Smethurst's questions later on, where he talks about Tom DeLonge's influence in his kind of formative years when it pertains to UFOs, and maybe that gives you a taste of where Tom came from and his journey through UFOs and what he does and doesn't believe and why he believed what he believed at the time. So yeah, it's definitely important, and one you can't leave out in the whole story, and that's what we're trying to cover as best we can in this series. Also, Taryn, I think asked a really pertinent question, and this is definitely one for you, Dan. If you can, try to state how much of an impact Blink 182 had on the following generation of musicians and on the entire pop punk genre in whole. Huge impact on a wide range of genres. Tom was part of trying to get away from the childish aspects of Blink 182 and trying to use their platform to promote the more serious subject matters. Thus, him leaving the band to start Angels and Airwaves. What do you think, Dan? I know you actually done a little bit of editing to that question because, as for the background, he didn't leave the band to start Angels and Airwaves, did he?
Well, to start Boxcar Racer, it was just kind of a side project he did while he was in a hospital bed recovering from surgery. And yeah, it kind of apparently came to him written on an acoustic guitar. Travis was roped in to do drums because it just makes sense. They were friends. And that was where Mark kind of felt left out. And that was the start of the kind of schism in the band, so to speak. But Taryn is absolutely right. Like Blink were so influential to so many bands. A little while back, about a week or so, there was a gig poster going around called When We Were Young, and it's this big festival in America that's kind of all of those bands that we grew up with, Paramore, people like that. And the first thing that struck me about it is that pretty much none of those bands would exist if Blink-182 didn't exist. I can't imagine Paramore except in second place on the bill because Blink-182 are headlining or something like that. So there were these huge generational pushes into kind of angst and expressing these things. And one of the things that attracted me to Blink was the kind of fact that all of these incredible artists were around. I grew up listening to, my parents gave me Meatloaf and bands like that. And all very accomplished musicians. And then along come these three snotty kids from San Diego that prove that you can just do this in a garage with your mates. And that really appealed to me. And that's what I ended up doing. And ever since then, I followed that. And that attitude, I think, of, I know we're not professional, but screw it, let's go for it anyway and kick in a few doors and see what happens, is what kind of led Tom to start knocking on doors to get the UFO subject moving. Blink were an enormous band by the time Tom left. And he then went into doing a movie called, I don't know if you've seen Love.
No, it's a kind of art kind of project?
Yeah,
movie.
Very much kind of was the reason that Angels on Airwaves existed, was to create these art projects that had not just music but also comic books and movies and things like that to kind of augment and explore the subjects. And Love was this film made by I forgot this gentleman's first name, but his surname was Eubank, William Eubank, I think. He made Underwater as well, and he's gone on to have a great film career now. But he started there with Tom, so I'd recommend people go watch that because you'll kind of get Tom's lovey-dovey side. The statement that love's going to save us all and that kind of stuff are captured very much in that film. And with Angels and Airwaves, essentially come Tom's understanding of how he could use the platform he built to make, essentially, I'm going to be crude, dick jokes, for actually changing the world and helping people live better lives. Whether you agree with Tom or not and how he's done that, I think that's a very noble cause, to turn the essentially capitalist machine to a good cause.
Yeah, they certainly stood out at the time, and I remember being a kid and seeing all the small things. What's My Age Again, and all the small things taking the mick, and being, if you don't understand taking the mick, making fun at, whatever the phrase might be where you live, bands like the Backstreet Boys and Britney Spears and those
that's
kind of
right.
pop bands, and they
I
would just
remember
tear
Mark
them
laying in
apart.
a field, kind of with his shirt unbuttoned, with a dandelion that she then eats. Kind
Making
of
fun of all
Christina
those
Aguilera jokes.
all those tropes, wasn't it? They were so used to in music videos, and you're like, oh, these guys are really funny, and they don't take themselves seriously. But
Yeah.
there's a Blink-182 sound to a song, and usually it's that high doodle 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 doodle. You hear that guitar, and it kicks in, and Travis Barker's drums are very unique, and they definitely had a distinctive sound. Like one of my favorite bands is Oasis. My favorite band is Oasis, and a very distinctive guitar sound. They've got a very distinctive, lead singer, and you just know when it's one of their songs. For me, Blink-182 I never followed after Tom left. I'm a fan of those kind of big albums, and the Tom, Mark and Travis show was a staple of my youth. So I suppose that's something that To the Stars and Tom's journey really appealed to me long before I even had grand ideas like starting a podcast on UFOs.
A lot
Because
of. Sorry, go on.
no, I was just gonna say, because he was part of my youth like that. It was like one of your heroes, going off and doing something so different, but radically different to what you would expect them to do, and they're all of a sudden in this really intense situation with these really dangerous people and dangerous scenarios and situations. And and a question I'm going to ask you in part 2 is, did Tom DeLonge change the world? And you don't answer it yet, but there's an argument for that and against it, I'm sure, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question to consider. The Angels and Airwaves stuff, the first album was written. A lot of it was written for Blink, and the Blink fans out there are probably screaming at me to explain that Tom was very much the kind of the creative engine in Blink that kept pushing them into the new genres. So when you hear that shift from All the Small Things to Stay Together for the Kids, that's mostly Tom kind of getting a bit bored and trying to push the band's sound a bit. So
One of
even
my
though
favorite Blink songs.
Well, they have. You're right that they have a recognizable sound,
Yeah.
but I just wanted to point out it didn't mean that they didn't evolve.
Yeah.
They started as a pop punk band, and I'd argue they finished as just a rock band.
Yeah.
And when I say finished, I mean when Tom swapped out with Matt Skiba, who does a great job, but the fact that you can look at those albums now and see that songs are written by 17 different songwriters instead of those 3 kids in the garage explains exactly why that appeal is just now.
Yeah, listen, you can still go and see Queen, but it's not Freddie Mercury singing the songs. As great as Adam Lambert is, and others who may have stepped in at times, it's not Freddie Mercury. So like you say, Blink is Tom, Mark, and Travis. That's the band.
And Travis isn't even the original drummer as well. There was a chap called Scott Rayner, who the song "Man Overboard" is supposedly about. And Scott actually he had troubles with, or the rumor was he had troubles with addictions, but he actually works with charities now, and he teaches kids to drum and kind of helps a lot of people. So it's really sweet that he didn't go down that road of big fame, because he's found a way to change the world in his own little way, even not being near that big band machine.
Yeah, we won't get too much more into the music side of things, and we'll move on. But that was pertinent. I thought it was a good question to ask as well, and Dan is certainly the man to break that down for you.
Can I just ask one thing for the listeners? Any Blink fans out there? Let me know what post the Matt Skiba songs, which one of those you'd like to hear Tom's version of.
Good question.
I think that'd be interesting.
Cool. Brandon got in touch and said, I'd like to know if Tom has a central point of contact for scientists to collaborate research through. I'm a member of the Institute of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. SCU is something we've talked about at times on the podcast. And as most of his projects have resulted in a slash and burn of the prior entities, such as To the Stars Academy, it makes reaching out to the scientists he's worked with almost impossible, as they are disbanded almost immediately after going public. That's not 100% true, is it? But TTSA was around for a while, and I suppose there's been more movement on that. But
yeah,
I get
few
what
years.
Brandon.
And there were I would talk to customer service there, and the publicist specifically was kind of hard to get in touch with. So I'm not sure what was happening there. I think Brandon has a good point so far.
Yeah, and there's a frustration. Brandon goes on to say, I hear time after time, why won't mainstream science look at the phenomenon? The answer is some of us, myself included, are trying very hard to do just that. But getting a hold of any of the figures begging for scientists to contact them has primarily resulted in silence or shuttered organisations. And that speaks to what you said there, Dan. So if you would please be so kind in your episode, make it very clear that if someone wants to ask scientists to take a look, they need to give us contact information they will actually respond to. Otherwise, it's extremely unprofessional of them to say we're ignoring the subject matter. And yeah, that's fair if that is out there.
I
Even
mean,
I was going to
Abby
say,
is contactable, right? He's
yeah,
fairly active in the media. He'll go on, and anyone that wants to talk to him, he loves to feed that curiosity. It would be nice to be able to say the same was true of TTSA, but I don't think it is.
yeah, and I would say that to Brandon that reach out to an Aviloa, because look at the growing roster of the Galileo project, and reach out to UAPX, who again are doing the work they're doing, and we're waiting with bated breath to see the results that we're hoping to get by April. Hopefully from UAPX as well. So Gary Verhees and co. And there are some people that are very, very much open to the subject. But yeah, I can appreciate, and I suppose we can be guilty of that as well, Dan, when we use that the blanket statement that mainstream science needs to get involved. Actually, mainstream science is now involved. We just want
Yeah.
more of it to be involved.
Yeah. That's a very true statement. We should put that on a banner.
Yeah, we'll get it on one of your t-shirts. The next up, Dave. Next, I said next up. Next up, Dave Smethurst. That's the one, like a tongue twister. Dave, you will appreciate, as you always tell me to. We have to edit your question a little bit. Dan's done that, by the way, so you can drop Dan a message privately. You'll know the stuff he's cut out. Dan's going to laugh at that. So the first thing to note is that Tom DeLonge built up a personal knowledge of ufology, a la Linda Moulton Howe, and obviously we touched on the Dr. Stephen Greer stuff as well, which he added to information he got from briefings, which is why it's hard to sort out the truth from the fiction with Tom. So basically, Dave said he finds Tom DeLonge interesting as he thinks he holds a lot of core secrets, but they are contaminated. And I think we touched along those lines, didn't we, Dan, in part one?
Yeah, I like the phrasing there, though.
Yeah, the most important thing he has said is that there are some dreadful reasons why we haven't been told the truth. He alluded to this on the Jimmy Church round of interviews and was told to shut up and has not mentioned it since. That would be a key focus for Dave. Again, I suppose that touches Dan, doesn't it, on having his wings clipped and basically being told off for how much he was saying. How much do you buy into that it was because of statements like the dreadful reasons? And I suppose you could link in the kind of somber aspect of it, as people always jump on with Lou.
Well, that's a very apt comparison, I think. Talking about how things kept him up at night and scared him for 3 days versus Lou just kind of explaining that it's going to be a very somber moment for us. Two very different flavors of responses. And yeah, I think it speaks to why Tom was probably told to chill out, because you're just going to make everyone panic by saying that kind of stuff, And now even when he tells that story, he goes into how his mother deals with religion and what she would see in this uncertainty of reality, and he tells it in a much more hopeful way these days than he did back then. And I think, yeah, if you're trying to get people curious about the subject, scaring them isn't the way to do it.
It reminds me a little bit of where we're at in the last couple of months, and I've said the term cataclysm keeps getting brought up by various personalities. Frank Milburn, Michael Masters, Ross Coulthart, John Ramirez, all in the last couple of months. We interviewed all of them on this podcast, but on other podcasts as well, they talk about these cataclysms. And just today, one of the listeners on YouTube made a comment that they find it quite scary that so many people are bringing up this talk about potential future cataclysms, and is there a timeline in the next few years where something really bad could happen? I mean, there's a good chance that these people are all talking to the same person, and in what they're saying, this one person is putting out something that they've heard, or it's a rumor, or they're not sure of, or just from whatever they're talking about, it's getting thrown out there. Could that also be the same person or persons that go back to when Tom was finding out this information?
Yeah, perhaps. It's really hard to know. But to the cataclysm stuff, I would say that it is scary, but the reality of the world is that, we could be hit by a meteor like the Tunguska air explosion event, well, supposedly. And if that happened over New York, the whole city would be gone. It would just be gone. Anything bigger, could wipe out everything. So, and there are all these, a micro black hole could pull the planet apart, and we can't live life panicking about these things. So I'd just say that even though cataclysms are being spoken about a lot, there's no hard date. You could, get hit by a car walking out your front door tomorrow. Try not to panic too much. It's curiosity. And think of it this way: if there is a cataclysm coming, it's better to know about it so we can protect ourselves. We'll train up Bruce Willis and send him up to drill whatever it is that's coming.
And that's Dan's moment of zen. We'll probably all die in some horrendous, horrific way, but don't worry about it too much.
Yeah,
Not
Bruce
before
Willis
Dan's
got
been to
it.
Columbia. Yeah, Bruce Willis has got it covered, folks. But yeah, that is that thing. And again, the Cataclysm story is one that always comes up and is there through every major religion and is there through every, famous, oh God, what's the word? Nostradamus philosopher? No.
Prophecy.
Prophecy advocate. All people who make these predictions, they're always there. They always come. They always go. But again, interpretations are there to be just that, interpreted. And the ending of one thing can be the beginning of another. The Mayan calendar finished, but it recycles and restarts, and birth and life and all that good stuff. So for me, it's one of those things. It's great they keep coming and going because we don't want to be talking about that cataclysm that happened, Dan. That was pretty shocking, because that's not what we want to be doing. If we do have another race of beings that are helping out in that, just on that, folks, I went to see Moonfall last night, the movie, and
if you can't see this, if you're not watching the YouTube, I'd recommend you jump on just so you can see Andy's head shake when he sighed then.
I'm not saying it's bad, and I'm not saying it's good. I'm really confused with it. I really want to talk about it on the podcast because there's some really interesting ideas, and if you've seen it, you'll know why. If you've seen the trailer, you'll get the point. But when it goes into those details, it was quite interesting. But there's like ropey CGI. It gets stuck between being Shaun of the Dead meets Independence Day, but the worst of both, not the best of both.
Sure.
And I keep waiting on it, deciding on, is it a parody comedy of a disaster flick? But I don't think it is. And yeah, but yeah, anyway, it talks about beings and cataclysms, not to give anything away, and it's got some really interesting theories. And again, that's one to talk about on the podcast down the line, probably. But yeah, so for me, they come and go. It never happens, which is a good thing. What can you say on it, Dan, other than, it's a really easy one for us to come on and go, we've got a source that's told us there's going to be a cataclysm potentially in the next 5 years that we hope some other entities, divert this from happening, stop it from happening. 5 years comes and goes, and yep, Dan, yeah, those entities helped out. Yeah.
Plus, we kind of have cataclysms going on now with global warming and all of the natural weather disasters that are happening, and so on and so forth. The list goes on and on and on. And the more we learn about the system of planet Earth, the more we're going to start understanding that we've damaged it like crazy, and we're going to have to adapt with it. So if you ask some people, we are in a catastrophe now. So it's all a matter of perspective. One man's prophecy is another man's fiction.
100%. So yeah, but no, appreciate that. Thank you. Good shout. Good question. The next up was Jessica. Greetings, Andy and Dan. I've cut out Jessica's really nice comments about the podcast because that's what we do, Dan. In the comments section on Reddit, someone mentions that Tom believes in an underground pyramid somewhere that is suppressing human consciousness. I haven't been able to track down an interview of him mentioning this, but was wondering if there was any truth to him saying that. It wouldn't really surprise me, just curious. I would also like to hear more pieced together version of his theory. The phenomenon could be parasitic entities. I've heard that interview as well, Dan. Do you know off the top of your head which one it was?
I do. Mr. DeLonge goes to Washington. That's what's popped up for me. Spreedy.com. Here we go. Tom DeLonge just announced there's a huge underground pyramid beneath Alaska that's key to this. He did nothing of the sort. This is exactly what you spoke about when, or what Dave spoke about when he referenced Linda Moulton Howe. This is from Linda Moulton Howe. He's repeating something intriguing to get people intrigued, but I don't think he has to do things like this. When you look it up, you find that basically there's a giant mountain in Alaska, that, Antarctica, that, oh no, Alaska, ignore me. I did get it right.
Are you sure it's Alaska? Antarctica is the one that's buried in ice.
Alaska, it's in front of me.
Alaska is as
But
well.
I was going to reference. So, can you remember the alien face that people found on Google that was in
Yep.
the ice and the snow? It's kind of that situation again. When you look at it from certain angles, it looks like a pyramid. Other angles, it does not. Some people think that there's this thing underneath it that's suppressing human consciousness and stopping us advancing. But they never define exactly what they mean by those things. So, if anyone has any more information on this, let us know. But as far as I can see, it just seems to be a story.
And it's one of those ideas that isn't new. It wasn't brought up by Tom, and it's been around for a long time. And I'm sure if you go back and watch old versions of Star Trek from the 60s, you will see parasitic entities and, Star Trek Next Generation, Star Wars fan fiction probably in there somewhere. It's not a new idea. But yeah.
The parasitic stuff, it's kind of separate to that, really, because Tom's referring to negative entities that feed off negative emotions, that are kind of made of energy and not meat suits like us. That kind of crosses over with a lot of esoteric stuff like Crowley and things like that. So if anyone's interested in that area, I'd recommend go down that rabbit hole and you'll find a bit that's familiar.
And it's the same as, we heard Tom talk about love and how powerful love is as an emotion. And he's not the first person to do that. But, these entities feed on fear. Uniting the planet and being one would be such a powerful tool. That was something that was said in a lot of those interviews, again, around those early days as well.
It's a strange thing for a creative individual to say that a hive mind would be better. I think that's weird.
Yeah. Again, this is where, like Dave and others have said, Tom's opinion is made up of a whole load of. I think I said, I can't remember the interview. Was it with Kurt J. Mungle about Tom's a guy with a 1,000 piece jigsaw,
That's right.
And he's got half the pieces, and the picture he's got makes a little bit of sense, but he's not got all those bits to fill in and can't see the full picture, and he fills in the blanks himself in creative ways, I think, at times, just depending on what he has and hasn't heard. So, but yeah, again, I'm not using the word lying there because that's not what I think. So, yeah, creative soul, creative personality, he's always going to have that tendency. Next up, Machine Secret got in touch. Thanks for sending over that Tom DeLonge AMA. That was interesting to read through. Machine Secret did say, though, at one point within the AMA, Tom mentions a site called RAMSITE as a location of recovered craft material. Not found anything on this site. Any ideas? The short answer to that is no. I looked it up and I was asking Dan before we recorded as well if he could find anything. And again, Dan, drawing a total blank on that, aren't we?
No. It will be added to the list of questions for when we next speak to Lou or someone like John Ramirez or, someone that works on the inside that might have heard that name.
Or if you are one of the listeners out there who knows, maybe you work there, maybe you work there now and are listening to this podcast as you work on reverse engineering some tech. But if it's something you're aware of, or you can point us in the direction of some interviews or even articles, that would be great. Send over. But my Googling is coming up with nada, nothing, zip. And to finish up, we had Kai, CAE. Again, you can correct me on that one. I'm more than happy. During an interview, Tom mentioned that one of the most significant UFO encounters he is aware of happened during the Starfish Prime high-altitude nuclear test in 1962. If I recall correctly, Tom suggested the explosion may have taken down a UAP. Do you have any details on this? Yes. So initially, Starfish Prime, and this is from a website that's not very well known called Wikipedia. Starfish Prime is and I've still never donated. I really should. Starfish Prime is part of Project Fishbowl or Operation Fishbowl, which was going to be 5 high-altitude / in space nuclear tests, explosions in space. The first one didn't go ahead, or it did, but it had to be aborted and blown up and destroyed during launch due to issues. This Starfish Prime was the second. And essentially, the blast at altitude could be seen in Hawaii, 900 miles away, through cloud cover. There are some pictures online of that. And the idea was there's many different rumors and everything like that goes along with it, including the UFO stuff. But it was to look at the ways to combat ICBM missile launches from the Soviet Union, stuff like that. But inadvertently, from a UFO point of view. Apparently, a story goes that it knocked a UAP out of orbit, out of the atmosphere, wherever it may have been. Not deliberately, but from that, this is where EMPs, as Dan's notes I've got here as well, we learned that EMPs have an effect on UAPs, yep, and the others. So, Dan, thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a story that's gone around a lot. Credit to Red Panda Koala. It was in his video, otherwise I would have forgot to make notes on it. We'll pop his videos in the description, because he did a lot of legwork and was a great reference for a lot of what I'm talking about. But yeah, apparently it was the first time that we knocked a UAP down. And it perhaps led to how we chose to position nuclear assets around the world. Again, it's kind of, we have evidence that this happened. We don't necessarily have evidence of the UAP stuff. The records show that there was a satellite knockdown during the launch, which was said to be a British satellite. But again, we just don't know. It's kind of a choose your own adventure type thing.
Yeah, pretty interesting. And again, it is just that. It's a story. Our friend Sean Cahill, famously in our Room 101 special, talked about sticking anything with one source in the nice but no thanks category, because it's just got that one source. And this is one of those things where it is just a story. There's no hard and fast evidence on it, but it's not totally out with the realms of possibility that one of these, experiments did inadvertently show us like the discovery of penicillin, that actually we were trying this, but this happened off the back of it, and this thing crashed because we blew this up, and the EMP, the blast, was actually much more powerful than they expected, so it caused burglar alarms. And there's a Scottish word for you, burglar, yep. It caused those alarms to go off again in places almost over 1,000 miles away, and shook homes and all that kind of stuff as well. So they learned a lot. And maybe on that day, if anyone wants to Google it, check out Starfish Prime, Operation Starfish Prime, Project Starfish Prime, and you'll find info on that as well. Dan, anything to add to this part 1.5 before we wrap up?
No, I think we've covered the listener questions. Thank you so much for sending all these in, by the way. It's great. There's so much to cover there. It helps us remember some of the finer points.
Yeah, and as we do this, we are going to wrap up right now, and we are going to go straight into recording part 2, which we're looking forward to. There's probably going to be 4, maybe 5 parts to this whole series as we go along, but we want to be doing a part 2.5 and 3.5 to get listener points, listener questions, listener thoughts in. So anything you have, ideally, please email me over ufouapam@gmail.com, and we'll add those in for a part 2.5. And once you've heard part 2 as well, you can stick in any questions or thoughts, and if we get anything wrong, please correct us in there as well. But Dan tends to correct me when I get stuff wrong, so you don't have to do that.
Not always. I didn't correct Poway, and I kind of knew about that. It just wasn't a big deal.
P-O-Y-A.
Or I thought so, but it's relative to the resident. It was a big deal, so I'm glad we got to it.
It was like Glasgow whenever the Americans say Glasgow. Yeah. But yeah, that's us, folks. Pleasure to have done part 1.5. Dan, thank you. If you want to check out part 2 early, ad-free, all that good stuff, and support the podcast as well, sign up to patreon.com/that UFO podcast. Check out Apple. There's still that 2-week free trial for the Apple subscription. It's like less than the price of a Starbucks coffee. You can buy like 3 Starbucks coffees for the price you can support this podcast. Same with Spotify Premium. Search That UFO Podcast Premium on Spotify. It's a separate feed. And also you can check out the YouTube channel, and you can sign up to be a member where you get access to the videos early and ad-free as well. That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet, and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/that UFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO Podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFOUAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little around. Meditated gamma state full on meta. Can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. Jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. And I called out to my boys, they thought this was noise, they thought it was a dream, they thought it was my toys, they thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what to do because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jake? But for being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life, consider